Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, with our main topic today. We're discussing today Egypt's relations with Africa, the historical relations, and also the deeply rooted cultural and historical relations between Egypt and the African countries. Well, to shed more light on this, we have the pleasure to have with us this morning in the breakfast show our dear guest, Dr. Samir Abbas, historian and researcher. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. The pleasure is mine for being with you today.
I have the honor to have you, of course. Dr. Abbas, could you give us your insight concerning when did the historical relations between Egypt and African countries start, and what was the scene, or could you give us your insight concerning since the ancient Egyptians?
So that's a very good way to start, like
Yes.
starting with a history timeline. So the Egyptian ties with Africa, first of all, from geographical point of view, we are in Africa, Egypt is in Africa. And as early as 7,500 BC, which is more than 9,000 years ago, almost 10,000 years ago, we have a very strong evidence that ancient Egypt, or ancient Egyptian civilization, is evolved in sub-Sahara Africa. There is a very important archaeological site known as Nabta Playa. Nabta Playa, like with modern speaking, lies about 120 kilometers to the west of the desert from Abu Simbel temple. Nabta Playa as an archaeological site is considered one of the most important sites to connect Egypt and Egypt civilizations in a very early stage, as early as 10,000 years ago with Africa. So it is a fact that the ancient Egyptian civilization emerged from sub-Sahara desert, and the origin of the ancient Egyptian, they are Africans, and that was before immigration or immigrating or migrations to the Nile Valley, and that was following some weather changes. So the global weather changes is not only happening actually today, that was happening throughout the ages, and that was something the early ancient Egyptians, which is still, that is early to call them an Egyptian at that time, because Egypt as a country was not still emerged. Egypt as a country dates back to 3000 BC, so like the unification, but before that we are talking about 4,500 years before that time. So they faced a weather challenge. That's in that early time, sub-Sahara desert, it was not a desert as we see it today. It was kind of a lush green. It was like a savanna with animals, with plants, with rainfall, which enables the early ancient Egyptians in this early time of history to live, to domesticate animals, to cultivate their crops as well. And because of desertification process, so the early ancient Egyptians, they start abandoning this sub-Sahara and travel to the Nile Valley. And only from this point, when Egyptians settled on the Nile River, it was the opposite. So they kept their African roots, but for logistics reason, it was complicated for them to establish a direct link with Africa anymore. So, and we are talking about more specific about the first cataract. So for those who are familiar with the nature of the Nile River, so the Nile River is very easy to travel in from the Mediterranean Sea to Aswan. But once you get to Aswan, you face the cataracts, which is this rocky part of the river, which is make it very difficult very challenging to travel through to the south. And when early ancient Egyptians, they settled on the Nile Valley from Aswan all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, so it became more complicated to establish links with the south of that.
Yes. So, Dr. Abbas, to what extent is ancient Egypt involved in or deeply rooted in the African civilization? What I would like to say, the role of the Egyptian civilization in the African countries long ago.
Okay, that's a very good actually question. So, even with the complication or the challenges with traveling across the first cataract, but Egypt did not forget about the Egyptians didn't forget about the African roots. And we see the echo of the African echo in the Egyptian art and the Egyptian civilization, the Egyptian language all the time. So most of the culture practiced by the ancient Egyptians, that was still practiced in African country. And of course, not forgetting that the ancient Egyptian art, which is introducing the ancient Egyptians as a dark skin color, which is, of course, that was, Egypt was soon after became like a melting pot with different race from Mediterranean, from the Middle East, as early as the ancient time as well. But it seemed that the ancient Egyptians, they like to refer themselves as a dark skin, not fair skin. And there is many evidence for that. And when you look at the art, the brown rich skin color, that is the most common actually for the Egyptians to refer to themselves. When they choose colors, like the most favorite colors, they choose it for their gods, the ancient Egyptian gods, like Osiris, for example. Osiris was painted as green or as dark black. When they choose like rocks for making a coffin or making a statue, closest, they preferred like the dark stone. Even the country was named Kemet in ancient Egypt. Like Egypt was more like a Greek name, or driven from the ancient Egyptian word Kemet, which means black. So that was, which is mean that the ancient Egyptians, they never forget their links with Africa. Another historical events which was happening in Egypt to re-establish the links with Africa, that was as early as the Old Kingdom. As we know that when Egypt was unified 3000 BC, yes. Egypt history classified into Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom. So, and it was quite common, the trade expeditions between Egypt and Nubia and Kosh, that was extremely common in the Old Kingdom. Which in the Middle Kingdom, they start putting like kind of settlements, building settlements in Nubia, Upper Nubia and Lower Nubia and Kosh, in order to protect their trade routes. And then this relationship took a very dangerous turn in the New Kingdom. That's when the Egyptian army, for the first time, decided to practice a colony, to have a colonized Nubia and Kosh. So the links was there from ancient Egyptian time, and the ancient Egyptians, they practiced these links in annual events.
Yes. So, Dr. Abbas, in your opinion, Egypt was isolated during the era or during the colonial period. So could you give us your insight, or what's your point of view concerning this?
I'm very glad that you mentioned this particular topic, or I asked this question because that was a key point in Egypt's relation with Africa today. So what happens? What destroyed Egypt's relation with Africa? So it was mainly colonial period, and when you look at, that deserved like to have a talk on its own, but very brief.
Can we say that during this colonial period, this colonial period was keen to isolate or to strip Egypt from the rest of Africa, because when Egypt is unified with Africa, this would make it the country more stronger?
That's definitely not only the country, the continent will be
yes,
strong. Not only because that is the new approach we have to address.
Yes.
We are not only talking about Egypt links with Africa only for the benefits of Egypt, for the benefit of Africa as well. So yes, that is very much true. And another reason as well, to keep their business and their trade. So one of the very profitable trade in that time, and that was one of the most important support of the global trade, that was the slave trade. And the slave trade had a very interesting story, which is not in a good way, but it was, most of the slaves that were coming from Africa during the colonial period, and to introduce Egypt as an African country, that will damage their slave trade, because the African slaves has been introduced not as a full human being, as like half animals and half humans. And unfortunately, there was a scientific research to support these claims in order to justify the slave trade. So when the colonial power, when they stepped into Egypt and they found the pyramids, the Sphinx, the great Egyptian civilizations, and they wanted to introduce it to the world. If it was introduced to the world based on its African origin, that will destroy their business, because that means that the slaves, which has been introduced as half human and half animals now, 4,000 years ago, they were able to create and build like mega structures the Europeans, they cannot even understand how it was built.
Yes.
And that's why, that is one of the main reasons why the colonial power decided to strip Egypt from its African roots. Of
Yes.
course, there is not only one reason. Another reason, which is you are hinted for, that Africa is one of the biggest continents with resources. And among these resources, not only the like oil or steel or copper or gold or whatever, but also the people itself. So when the colonial power, when they failed to cultivate farmlands in Latin America, because of the indigenous people there, they died because of diseases has been carried by white man in Latin America. The only alternative was healthy African young people, to enslave them to cultivate the sugarcane and the cotton.
Yes.
In Latin America. And based on these standards, they realized that there is an advantage, not only like the mining resources, but also the human resources in Africa. And that's why to stop the links between Egypt and Africa, that was important to keep their privileges.
Yes.
Because Egypt is a gate to Africa. Egypt is a gate to the Mediterranean world, to the European world, is a gate to the Middle East as well, which has had a very strategic importance, especially after the Suez Canal. So if African countries have this access to the world, that will make Africa evolve in a way which is not the way colonial power wanted in that time.
Yes. Dr. Abbas, if we look to the history, and long ago the Egyptian state was bigger than, of course, the Egypt now, and the Egyptian state was covering a number of African countries to the south, the Sudan, of course, and also Ethiopia, and from the west, Libya, and from the east until a part of Asia. So why was it important for Egypt, or what made Egypt more stronger when it covered a large number of countries inside Africa?
Okay, so in first of all, historically, that's the colonial interest of Egypt in the rest of African countries that dates back to the New Kingdom, to the Egyptian New Kingdom.
Yes.
But we can say, some historians will debate that and say that from the Middle Kingdom as well. We are talking about like 3,800, 3,500 years ago. And when it was started, it was mainly first to protect the trade routes between Egypt and Africa. And Africa was a very important source for many goods, many things which is ancient Egypt needed. Among them, that was gold. That was very important, needed in ancient Egypt at that time. And also to protect Egypt from a danger, from attacks which might happen from the south. Yeah. And that was the beginning of the Egyptian colonial interest in Africa. But that was followed by kind of enforcing Egyptian culture in Nubia and Kush in that time. Yes. I will give you an example, like Abu Simbel Temple, for example, when it was built. You know, historically, it was built on a Nubian ground, and that was mainly to influence the Nubians to follow the ancient Egyptian beliefs and respect the ancient Egyptian king Pharaoh, which is Ramses II in this time, as the king, not only for Egypt, as the king for Egypt and Nubia and Kush as well. So the ancient Egyptians, they have already an agenda a long time ago. And then the colonial powers, they came also with their agenda. So it was not Egypt which is decided in the colonial power to take over other territories outside of the Egyptian border. It was for the colonial benefits. And even the treaties along the Nile Valley for distributing the Nile River, also it was tailored for a colonial interest in Egypt. And that is the main problem when we look at why there is not a good relationship between Egypt and the rest of African countries now, because unfortunately we inherited this colonial perspective and these colonial challenges or colonial greed, you know. So and we're still discussing Egypt rule when it was used to colonize African, which is, I think that the approach now, it should be the opposite. It should be first not feeling proud that one day we have been taking over other lands by extending the borders as far as Ethiopia and as far as Sudan. So I think that we have to take another approach, which is that was a colonial approach. Now we have to talk about that a kind of a partnership So because what many of the African countries now, when they look at Egypt, they remember the colonial period,
Yes.
which is Egypt. They were not the Egyptian ruler. They were not in power. But if we are an Egyptian today, if we start feeling proud or talking about that Egypt was in control here and there, that will make them think or feel that we still thinking in them on the colonial mind.
Yes, yes. Doctor, you've just mentioned the monuments and the Abu Simbel temple in Noba. This brings us to a very important point, that the monuments that we see in Luxor and Noba, it extends till the Sudanese lands. There are a number of temples and monuments. So could you elaborate on this point?
I'm impressed with your knowledge about about how far the ancient Egyptian influence actually in Africa. Yes, actually, and that was part of my study and part of my personal interest, as well. So because the ancient Egyptian legacy or heritage, you can see it as far as Jebel Barkal, as far as Nuri, as far as Marawi in the heart of Sudan. Marawi is like 2 hours drive to the north of Khartoum. And that was a result of a very smart ancient Egyptian propaganda to promote for Egypt and Egypt culture and Egypt language and Egypt religion in the Upper Nile Valley, in what's called Nubian Kush today, as far as Khartoum. And the result, which is exactly what you mentioned, that is as far as Karima and Jabal Barkal and Nuri and El Kuru and Marawi as well. But we shouldn't forget, parallel to that, there was a native Nubian Kushite civilizations called Defufa that was as early as the start of the ancient Egyptian civilization, as early as 5,000 years ago, 3000 BC. And it was very advanced. And Defufa, the interesting thing about Defufa civilization, which is hardly talked about, is it is not linked with Egypt, it is not influenced with Egypt, which is considered kind of a proud of Nubians and Kushite. Then the Egyptian culture advance kind of prevailed, or not prevailed, overcome the Dufufa civilization.
Yes, yes. So, Dr. Abbas, why were some of the kings or the rulers of Egypt working to unite Egypt with Sudan? Like, for example, King Mina and also King Farouk.
That's a very good question. So what is the Egyptian historical interest in Sudan or in the Upper Nile Valley? First of all, the water. That is the first thing. The first answer is the water.
But the water extends to the Nile Basin, a large number of countries.
Yes, that's
but
very
why
much true.
specifically Sudan was important for Egypt?
So for ancient Egyptians, so apart from the water, for ancient Egyptians, apart from the water, there was gold. The word Nubia means come from the word gold. And gold in ancient Egypt, it was not a luxury item. No, it was very much integrated with their culture and with their religion as well.
Yes.
And with their economy too. And the gold was one of the reasons why the ancient Egyptians, they wanted to take over, in Sudan and North Sudan.
Yes, yes. I thank you very much for coming
today.
Thank you for your valuable information, and thank you for your time, Dr. Samir Abbas, a historian and researcher.
It's the pleasure of mine.
My pleasure too.
Thanks.
Well, with this, my dear viewers, we come to the end of this episode of our program, The Breakfast Show. I was accompanied with my colleague, Nermeen Abdurrahman. My name is Amal Mukhtar. Thank you for watching.